Good morning, everyone. My name is Camila Jurger, and I'm the Ecosystem Development Manager with Protein Industries Canada, based out of Winnipeg, and also part of the Manitoba Protein Consortium. This is a pre-recorded session, and if you have any questions, you can ask them at any time on our live chat. And I'm pleased to be hosting the session today on driving innovation through collaborative networks. We have two exciting guests for our panel. Stacy Pyett, Wageningen University and Research from the Netherlands, and Jim House from the University of Manitoba. Jim will be, after the pre-recorded session, Jim will be answering questions that you may ask on the chat. So Stacy and Jim, welcome to today's session. I'd like to start by asking each of you to introduce yourselves and provide us with an overview on how innovation is being driven in the protein sector from the perspective of both of your universities. Stacy, you can kick off and start. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me as part of this panel. Indeed, my name is Stacy Pyett, and I am what's called a program manager at Wageningen University and Research. And I'll just start first by telling you a little bit about our organization. So the organization is, as of now, 102 years old. We were founded as an agricultural university in the Netherlands way back when. We are still a rather unique organization in that we are very focused for a university. We have a kind of singular focus on life sciences, and our mission statement is to explore the potential of nature to improve the quality of life. So informing sort of that narrow focus scope on life sciences. We have three primary domains, one more in food and feed and food production, one in sort of the landscape and living environment, and one third domain that has to do with the social sciences, more societal and cultural interests. We are, as an organization, also rather unique in that we are not just a purely academic organization. So we actually have sort of two collaborating organizations under one umbrella. On the one side, we have a university piece, and the university is primarily focused on educating students, and of course also doing fundamental research through student projects, for example, supervising PhDs, et cetera. But we have a sort of parallel existing organization next to our university, which is a research-driven organization that is tasked with doing applied research, trying to sort of translate that fundamental science into applied solutions for example, for industry partners. So we have these sort of two coexisting organizations under the umbrella that we refer to as Wageningen University and Research, to acknowledge both of those pieces of the organization. We do aim to be very engaged. We engage a lot with industry partners to do research. We also engage with stakeholders, for example, policymakers. We're very engaged at the Dutch level, also at the European level, and even with some international and foreign governments who want to get access to our science to help them drive policy. We're also very engaged with philanthropic donors who have a shared interest with us in making the agro-food systems more sustainable into the long-term future. And of course, we work in partnership in all kinds of projects with industry partners in both of our legs. So sometimes with university through sponsored student projects, but also from the more applied research part of our organization. We have a 4-year strategic cycle within the organization. In 2019, we presented our most recent corporate strategy for the organization called Finding Answers Together, trying to acknowledge the fact that it's very important that we are looking for answers as a part of the societal dialogue and in engagement with stakeholders. In that strategic plan, we also called out 3 what we call investment domains, which are strategic areas where we aim to stay at the forefront of science, and we aim to continue to invest our own funding in those domains. I think the relevant one for you to know about today is called protein transition. And I'm a co-coordinator of that theme. That's a theme that we sort of share organization-wide, so all of our science groups are engaged with it. We have science groups from plant sciences, from animal sciences, from the agro-food sciences, also from social sciences, all engaged with this theme and sort of working in a transdisciplinary way to try and sort of advance where we are as a society, but also, scientifically in this field. And the other two, I'll just call them out just so that you're aware. One is connected circularity. I think that one is also very relevant for the topic of protein transition as well. It's really about, eliminating waste and moving towards circular systems, also covering more beyond protein specifically, things like circular packaging, plastics reduction, et cetera. Also an important part of that. And the third one is what we call digital twins. So that's more looking into big data. Also occasionally touches on the topic of protein when we're talking about sort of digital models, for example, digestive models, those kind of things under that theme. But for today, you have me, and my main focus is on protein transition. So pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thank you very much. It's very, very interesting to hear about what you guys are doing there. And definitely there are lots of lessons learned for us to do here in Manitoba. I'd like to pass on to Jim to talk about his experience so far and introduce yourself as well, Jim. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Camilla, and great to follow up with after Stacy and talk a little bit about the activities happening here at the University of Manitoba. So my name is Jim House. I'm a professor in the Department of Food and Human Nutritional Sciences at the University of Manitoba. And similar to Wageningen University, we are a research-intensive university. Our primary mandate is on education and training of students and on conducting both foundational discovery-based research as well as applied research. And with respect to protein, I think one of the areas that we're very keen on is this concept of sustainable protein systems and really looking at it from across the different dimensions of sustainability. So as Stacy mentioned, looking not only at the environmental aspects, but sociocultural aspects, the health aspects, and economic aspects of sustainability. And I think that's really key if you want to talk about innovation within the protein sector, that we keep that broad-ranging perspective when it comes to discussing sustainability in both plant and animal proteins. We have active research across the protein spectrum, as I mentioned, in both plant and animals and training and graduate programs, looking all the way from, well, you can choose the term that you like, gate to plate, farm to fork, bench to bedside. We basically working in a systems perspective. We have researchers that engage in looking at plant breeding, animal production practices, food processing, looking all the way through to assessments of those novel food ingredients in human clinical studies or metabolic studies. I think one of the areas that that we recognize is that we have a lot of people doing excellent work. I think what we could learn, where we could learn from, is examples such as what's happening in Wageningen, and look at creating a stronger network of researchers across those different dimensions. We have good collaborations and foundations within disciplines, and I think what we need to do is continue to evolve that so that we're getting the different perspectives so that we can truly address these whole of society issues as it relates to protein. So as part of that process, we're leading what's called the Manitoba Protein Research Strategy, which really attempts to gain a better understanding of the entire ecosystem within Manitoba, of the contributors to research, both in terms of the human resources, and the available infrastructure to conduct research, both within academic and research institute settings, within government and non-government settings, and with including our industry partners. And that broader understanding of that ecosystem will help form those stronger collaboration. That's our goal, and really within that protein research strategy. So so just basically a reflection of the work that we do here at the University of Manitoba. I'm representing one aspect of it in the work that we do more on the food processing and quality side. But the university, as you can imagine, is a bright and vibrant place with a lot of really good, talented people and great students. And I think one of the things that we need to keep moving forward is our ability to identify all the partners that can contribute to a sustainable protein ecosystem.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim, for your overview. I think it's really interesting to see how both of you brought really the side of having industry partners, having industry collaborating in the work that you're doing at the universities. So talking a little bit about collaborating with industry, what are the barriers that you've seen so far experienced by academic institutions such as the ones that you work for, and the research community in general, when you collaborate with industry on research projects? And how do you think universities can better align with market realities? And that would be, I think, I wanted to hear from both of you because probably you have some different experiences there.
Jim, do you want to take that one first?
Well, I'll pass it to you, Stacy. I'd love to hear the Dutch example first, and then I could.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think one thing that's just a very real factor in any collaboration between academia and industry is the matter of time. I mean, a PhD typically, in our context, the PhD takes 4 years, right? And most industry partners find 4 years to be like infinity, basically, when we have that conversation. That's part of the reason why we have this coexisting research structure, is to help us have a staff on hand who are able to run projects that have a little bit shorter running time, and to prevent us from having PhDs where we're kind of stitching together short-term projects where you get a sort of chaotic experience for the student, but also a stressful experience for the professor who's trying to sort of make sure that they have some continuity for their student. So one thing is just talking about how we can embed those shorter term projects and how we can sort of come up with concrete deliverables on an appropriate timeline, understanding what the industry needs are. I think that's very important.
I would agree. I think the issues around IP are universal. I don't think they need to be as big a barrier as most people believe they are. I think there are really creative solutions to working with IP. And the last thing you want is that the initial discussion between any new partners be a roadblock so insurmountable that the research can't progress at all. But to Stacy's point, I think it's really important that you have the ability to meet the expectations of partners, which tend to have a timeline that's much shorter than what we have in academia. And so I would agree. And having projects that might be better suited for working more at the master's level, for example, and where they can actually embed experiential learning within those programs as well, through, for example, a program that we have in Canada is the MyTax program, which allows for opportunities for trainees to work on research projects in association with industry partners. And I think as long as things can be structured in such a way that the students and the industry partners benefit, I think that there's opportunities for IP not to be the barrier that we initially perceive it to be.
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, I from what I'm hearing here is probably IP is a big barrier, or it's an opportunity as well, to work with private sector. But also, it's interesting that you mentioned about the timing. That sometimes the timing of universities of research are not the same timing. It's not the same timing as industry needs. So very interesting to hear about your experience there. So when we talk about barriers and opportunities, we see that government is often a co-funder of innovation and research, and often different governments, and we see this here happening in Manitoba as well, supports really collaborative efforts in the industry. In this context of, that we just talked about barriers experienced in research and collaboration, do you think the government has a role to play in advancing innovation on, just beyond simply providing funding? Is there anything else that governments could be doing right now? And maybe Stacy, would be interesting to know if there is something else going on in the Netherlands that you could share.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, well, I think to start with, Obviously, you know, funding research is an important, and stimulating research is an important piece. But also, how you stimulate research and how you fund research is very relevant. So thinking hard about, you know, what sort of interaction you're triggering with the specific funding instrument. One of the things I find a bit of pity, we have many subsidy instruments which stimulate us to collaborate in public-private partnerships with industry partners worldwide. It's very hard to find funding for academic collaborations that cross borders. I would love to see that there are instruments that would stimulate, for example, myself and Jim working together, and it's still hard to find those opportunities. They're few and far between. So, you know, how to provide funding, that's one that's really important. And number two, I think also a very important role is seeing sort of government programs and support for bringing actors together, right? And I think today is probably a great example of that, but that is a very important role, is to stay in the dialogue as sort of stakeholders, and to convene and to bring people together to trigger this kind of interaction. And number three, I realized that, you know, policy instruments are kind of a blunt tool. So there's not a lot of sort of subtlety in how we can use policy. But I think it is really important when we talk about a transition to talk about those pieces of policy that can help us either move toward a change or, you know, to the other side, sort of prevent change from the vested interests that are there. So I think it's very important that government stays on the table and make sure that the policy is there supporting the actual rollout of the research topics that we're researching.
No, absolutely. Jim, what are your views on the role of government just beyond funding on research?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll echo everything that Stacy said. So I think the instruments for international collaboration are really important. There are very few tools to do that, and I think it's something that governments can certainly look at and how to facilitate that. When it comes to the policy piece, just some examples where perhaps government can play a role, and we've seen some efforts here in Canada on legislative modernization, but certainly a lot of these issues that are potentially impacting innovation really come down to regulatory tools that are in place here in Canada. I'll just give an example on the protein sphere. Our current regulations around defining protein quality, so that we can make protein content claims on foods. There's been movement on changing those, but we still have this lack of concordance between Canada and the United States, for example, two different systems being used. And as most of our products cross-border, it becomes a major challenge for some of our, particular our players that want to supply materials into the US marketplace. And the fact that the methods that currently exist are basically methods that are not generally approved or thought fondly of by sectors looking for plant protein ingredients, because they require the use of animal bioassays. And so I think it's really important that we continue to advocate for changes for the regulatory tools, because I think there are some real barriers to innovation that are posed within not only protein quality, but if you're thinking from the livestock perspective, how we take byproducts or co-products from plant processing sector and use them within the livestock sector. They all have to be approved feed ingredients, and that's a very long, cumbersome process under the Canadian regulatory framework.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I just wanted to remind the participants, if you have any questions, feel free to send that through the chat. I wanted to ask Stacy, going on that line of talking about industry collaboration, what type of collaborative model exists for processors and producers, thinking kind of a value chain approach in the Netherlands to work with the research community, both within and outside the country? You guys just talked about how difficult it is sometimes to collaborate outside of your countries. So what models exist, if any, in the Netherlands right now? What do you see?
Yeah, so we have a pretty mature infrastructure for collaboration with industry partners, and including international industry partners. So there are basically two different models by which industry can collaborate in a consortium kind of framework. So One is what I would call the science model project, where we have a science grant, and I would classify, for example, EU funding in that domain as well. Those are usually bigger projects, 4 years kind of projects, multiple PhDs. Their sort of collaboration within the European Union is really important. And industry partners are invited to become associated with those projects for a relatively low financial contribution, but they're definitely not in the driver's seat. Your academic partners are in the driver's seat of those kind of projects. They're really sort of meant to be the deep science. And of course, I think there are great benefits to the industry partners who associate with that and sort of learning and picking up what they can from the scientific pieces of those projects. But then we have another model where industry has a little bit more influence over the project, and that's the public-private partnership model. These projects typically get 50% subsidy financing. Most of what we do in Wageningen uses the financing from what's called the top TKI, Top Kennisinstelling, Dutch words, Institute, which is money financed by the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture. Those public-private partnership models do aim to bring together supply chain partners. So we typically have 6 to 8 partners on a project. They might be shorter term, they might run 2 years, they might run 4 years. There's no sort of obligation to be a very long-term project. And those projects aim to basically do slightly more applied research. So sometimes a combination of a bit of fundamental research and more applied research. Those projects are open to international company participants. So anyone who works with a Dutch company or has a connection to a Dutch company, which if you're in the food and ag business, you probably do, are welcome to sort of join and come on board those kind of public-private partnerships. The downside to them is that we're not able to have international academic contributions on those kind of projects, which I still find rather a pity, but it is a very attractive proposition, I think, for industry partners.
Absolutely. Is there any examples or success stories that you could share with us in one of the previous projects that you've done, and maybe it's something that is already public, that's already being commercialized? Anything that you could share with us?
Sure, yeah. So I can talk about one of the projects that has gotten the most sort of international press and attention is a project called Plant Meat Matters, which is a project to develop a plant-based steak. So really a chunk of plant-based meat. That project also has about 8 partners, supply chain partners, from ingredient manufacturers through to end users, flavor house, you name it. And also an equipment supplier who's actually invested in sort of building an industrially relevant scale production line to be able to make that. That project is coming to an end. We've got, I think, a little bit less than a year to go. So, we'll be sort of coming out with IP in this domain and seeing how it goes forward in real life, in practice. But that's one that I think is personally quite an interesting success story. But we've started up others more towards specific ingredient domains. Breeding new pulses, for example, for end use application is one that I'm really excited about that we've started up in the past year.
Awesome. No, thanks for sharing that. That's really exciting. Jim, what do you think Manitoba's research community can learn from these examples from the Netherlands? And if you could share also a little bit of what you've been doing so far at the university to maybe mimic that experience or something else that you're bringing to really improve collaboration within our sector.
Sure. Well, certainly, I think the model in Wageningen in the Netherlands is it's a little bit different than our situation here in Canada, and being a province in Canada, I think we're a little bit more geographically dispersed than I think we envision what's happening within the Netherlands. And so I think, but there are definitely some lessons to be learned about supply chain integration on the innovation front. I think in Western Canada, which has traditionally been more a supplier of raw commodities, and now we're seeing advances on the ingredient side. but I don't think we've really hit our stride when it comes to the further advancement of ingredients into final consumer foods. And I think that really would be the next pathway to assist in innovation, is to really support the development of further value add, so that we can really take advantage of the entire research ecosystem that we have here in Manitoba to extend that innovation. Traditionally, the food centers have been based primarily in Eastern Canada, whereas in Western Canada, I think we have to keep extolling the benefits of the prairie crops and the prairie locale for investment in terms of continued value add. But I think within the province itself, just speaking from a provincial standpoint, we definitely have a research ecosystem. I think the work that we're spearheading on the Manitoba Protein Research Strategy and coming up with a database of expertise, so that we can really understand all of the players and what they have to offer within that broader sustainable food protein system, I think will help forge greater connections and also lead to opportunities for more engagement with researchers, so that they can look at these research projects. And I think that's what we wanted to see, is more opportunity for all of the players within the sector to continue to come together. But certainly that will involve, not only working to support those researchers and industry partners, but also continued investment on the innovation front. Certainly the governments have invested in research here at the university through the Canada Research Chair program. We do have a new Canada Research Chair in food protein processing and bioproducts, and I think that's something that again will help to cement the efforts that we have here in the province to identify our capacity and our ability to assist in advancing food proteins.
Awesome. No, that's definitely very important, and we see that how much collaboration can really drive innovation in our sector. Jim, do you have any examples or any success stories that you could share with us on projects that were successful in collaboration between the university and private sector?
Sure, there's a couple of examples. So certainly we have definitely a long history in if you want to use the generic term protein, which now has come to mean a whole new food category, but protein, canola is sort of a classic example from a historical perspective. Canola is like a success story from the University of Manitoba and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Saskatchewan, and developing it from basically a weed through to an industry that's now worth tens of billions of dollars in Canada. Now it's looking at opportunities to advance the meal fraction and improve the protein the protein quality and the protein utilization of that meal fraction, which is traditionally been used in the livestock sector, but looking for ways to extend that into food products for the human food system. I think that's really where there's continued opportunities. But that's just an example of how it literally took a village to move that weed into a billion-dollar industry. And if we continue to use those examples, by partnering with plant breeders, partnering with processing expertise, those that have expertise in finished good production, assessment of those components within human studies, to really position these new foods and new ingredients, so that we can generate continued interest. And so, more recent examples, I would say, work on. For example, on some bioactive peptides work that's happening within the university. So certainly we have an investigator, Dr. Aluko, who's been looking at bioactive peptides and their efficacy in reducing hypertension in patients. And so those are plant-derived components. And so those are being commercialized right now. And then certainly efforts on the regulatory side to try to continue to push for reform in how we label protein foods. And so a lot of work has been done there to assist the industry and our commodity partners with getting the data that they need to not only position their food products as proteins, but also continue to position ways in which we can reform that regulatory process.
Awesome. I have another question for you, Jim. We're almost finishing our time here, but I wanted to make sure that I asked you, how do you think we can leverage opportunities through the Canada Research Chair in Food Protein Processing and Bioproducts from the University of Manitoba and initiatives such as Protein Industries Canada, for example, the Protein Highway and others?
Well, sure. So that the chair and the Canada Research Chair, and that's held by Dr. Nandika Bandera, who just joined us last year. That's going to really provide a focal point around protein processing. In particular, some unique aspects of that project will be looking at how the byproducts can be further utilized, because that's a big issue within the sector, especially the plant protein sector, how we can take the co-products from processing and advance those. And so I think that's a real opportunity within that chair program. And the initiatives like Protein Highway, and also our collaborations internationally, including Bridge to Food, for example, as a collaborative network, allows those researchers and industry partners to come together to look at ways in which we can solve the problems that are really pre-competitive. So looking at ways that everyone has these issues. Regulations affect everybody. Processing issues and techniques and analytical methods basically impact everybody. And so there's lots of common ground where sectors can collaborate to advance protein innovation.
Awesome. No, absolutely. I think there's so much opportunity out there. I wanted to pass on to Stacy for her final remarks. Stacy, what do you like? What do you want to see in the future? Do you foresee a lot more collaboration with Canada? Maybe something that you're been working on that you're excited about. What's the future look like in proteins?
Sure. I think I can maybe use Jim's comments as a kind of springboard. We jointly have a conversation in one of those sort of shared platforms where we're present about the next thing we can do in protein nutrition. And as Jim said, that's something that sort of impacts everybody. If the nutritional quality of the protein is a problem, you're going to feel that all the way back in the supply chain. And that's also one that I think is really important to tackle internationally, because it's a problem, in the whole world, right? It's really an issue for everybody. And what you see now is that it's very piecemeal. There are, everybody has a different way of measuring protein digestion. The literature is very sort of isolated here and there. It's very hard to wrap your head around it and to get a coherent picture. So I would love to see a big international project that would tackle that would help us start to get a handle on the different tools for studying protein nutritional quality, and to see that we sort of get some harmonization on our side, on the academic side, but also in partnership with the industry, because it's so impactful also for industry partners.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim, any last comments?
I really do want to just to say that I think the framework around protein and food proteins has really evolved within the last decade here well, globally, but also here in Western Canada and Canada in general, and certainly investments from the government in Protein Industries Canada, for example, to continue to advance food protein systems, I think has been really important. And I think there's a greater role that all of our institutions can play within Manitoba, the colleges and universities, our research institutes, and our government labs, and our industry partners with their research facilities and their production facilities as well, because I think we all play a role in helping to advance the protein food systems. And we just need to, I think in the short term, need to better understand this ecosystem to make sure that we're covering all of those different dimensions of sustainability.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank our panelists for participating today. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to send through the chat. Jim will be online after the presentation to answering some of those questions. Stacy, thank you very much for your participation today. And also Jim, thank you. And I will conclude the session now.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much.